Hey everyone, welcome to the Zeitgeist on a Mighty Blaze. I am your host, Jane Roper. Here on the Zeitgeist, I talk with authors whose books touch on topics like race, class, gender, politics, health, science, whatever else I find fascinating and entertaining. We broadcast the first and third Thursdays of the month. And if you want to see what's coming up and also see what's happening across a Mighty Blaze, we broadcast about half a dozen shows every week. You can like us on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. You can also sign up for our newsletter at amightyblaze.com. So hope you'll follow us along. And my guest today is Daniel Black. Hello, Daniel Black.
Hello, Jane. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you for being here. Daniel Black is the author of 7 books, including The Coming, Perfect Peace, and They Tell Me of a Home. He is the winner of the Distinguished Writer Award from the Middle Atlantic Writers Association, has been nominated for the Townsend Prize for Fiction, the Ernest J. Gaines Award, and the Georgia Author of the Year Award. He was raised in Blackwell, Arkansas, and currently lives in Atlanta, where he is the professor of African American Studies and English at Clark Atlanta University, which I believe is also your alma mater, correct?
That's right.
I thought I saw that somewhere.
Very cool.
Black's latest novel is, I'm holding it backwards, Don't Cry for Me, backwards, upside down, which was published this week, right? Tuesday.
That's right. That's right. Just yesterday. Well, Tuesday.
Yeah, hot off the press. Library Journal calls Don't Cry for Me a deeply perspective evocation of what it has meant to be a man, and especially a Black man in the United States, told with quiet, sturdy intimacy. And 2-time National Book Award winner Jesmyn Ward calls it a perfect song. In this epistolary novel, a father writes to his estranged gay son from his deathbed and explores the examples of what Black men were supposed to look like, what they were expected to do, how they were expected to live, express themselves, and interact with others. It's beautifully written. It's evocative. I learned so much from this book, and it's an honor to welcome you, Daniel Black. Thank you for being here.
I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to talk about this book.
Awesome. Well, I talked about it in a lot of other people's words, so I'd love to hear you in your own words. How do you tell folks about your book?
Well, Jane, I always tell people that this book is really the resurrection of men. This book is about the ways in which fatherhood, fathering is being reconceived, is being reimagined. It's about the ways in which I'm hoping this book will inspire fathers to go get sons they threw away. Literally go get them, go find them.
Right.
To heal breaches, between generations.
Yeah.
And even more particularly for fathers to rethink and to re-understand what it means to have a queer son or an LGBTQ child, and to know that that child is just as precious, just as beautiful, just as magical, just as wonderful as any other child would be. So I'm hoping that this work does a healing in terms of the expanse of fathering and fatherhood.
Yes. And it also, I loved something that you wrote in your foreword. You said, I want readers to consider the capacity of our fathers' hearts. That was wonderful. And you wrote about how, again, in the foreword, how you were really inspired by your own father, or imagining your own father writing letters in this way.
That's right. And the truth of the matter is, I think so many fathers never had the capacity to speak their love, their fullest love to their children. And so they always translated it into things like labor, right? Into things like going to work, into things like making sure that children had a constant roof over their heads, making sure you ate every day, right? And those were acts of love. They absolutely were. But many times I think children misunderstood or just missed some of those signs because they didn't always translate as love.
Right.
They functioned that way, but they didn't always translate that way. And so I'm hoping that in this book, we will begin to see and understand ways in which our fathers were loving us, even when they were not around us.
Right. And there are so many different ways to express love, and oftentimes women express love differently. And, you have especially looking back further in history, although it's still very much the same in some places, you have the 2 very different kinds of expressions of love happening between the male and happening between the female, archetypally. And speaking, since I said archetypally, I thought it was interesting. I noticed it took me about halfway through the book. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. The father's name is Jacob. And so you have the whole, father of Israel,
That's right.
Jacob,
That's
and
right.
his wife is Rachel.
Right.
His father's Abraham.
Right.
Although I thought there's who else is? Oh, Esau. His brother is Esau.
That's right. His son is Isaac.
Son is Isaac. But in the Bible, right? Jacob's father is Isaac, right?
That's right. That's right. And I do that very intentionally because in this book, I'm showing how the lack of love and the inability to love in many instances, makes the father the son.
Yes. Yes.
So that the father has to come back to the son for redemption.
Right.
He asks the son to help him and to heal him.
Right. And that's kind of what he's doing through his letters, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. That's
yeah.
Exactly. And I'm showing the ways in which manhood and masculinity, in many ways, has distorted our intimacies. Right. And patriarchy has absolutely imprisoned Black and white and all other races of men, right, in terms of their fullest expression of love to their children. And so I'm really hoping and praying that through this Abraham, Isaac, Jacob model, I can really help us to see that we need to trade out some of this toxic masculinity for the risk of the sharing of our hearts as men.
Right. Because it's imprisoning. And I kept thinking about the ways that throughout the book, Jacob says, I should have done this. I should have done this. You know, I should have hugged you. I should have shown you this. That even at the very beginning, you know, talking about incidents other than the ones with his own son at the beginning of the book, he writes about an incident where a boy, a classmate who we suppose was probably gay, is tormented by his peers. And although Jacob doesn't directly participate, he's a witness to it, and expresses this regret about not being able to interfere. And throughout, you get the sense he's just imprisoned by these expectations of what it means to be a man.
Absolutely. And part of his imprisonment also is his lack of imagination, because yes, he's imprisoned by this traditional masculinity. The problem is that he doesn't know any other one.
Yeah.
And he can't figure out. He doesn't even know he has the right to create one. Right? As a poor Black boy in the South in the 1940s, he has been taught to obey, to follow instructions, to submit. You don't disrupt society. You simply surrender and follow along as a Black man. In fact, your achievement is just to stay alive. You know.
Right.
And so this man, once he becomes a father, he gets a son who is so different from himself that in fact he literally doesn't know what to do with him.
Right.
And by the time he realizes it, and by the time he figures it out, his son is old enough to have a son.
Right.
And so I'm really just exploring the ways in which, oh my God, can we please get to the place as a nation of all races? Can we please get to a place where fathers just take a chance and just say, listen, son, I don't really know who you are. I don't really understand the fullness of the level of difference you bring, but I want to because you're mine and you belong to me. Teach me, explain to me. But see, manhood traditionally leaves no room for humility. And because of that, Jacob has to learn the hard way. And it costs him so much. Right. But and by the time he gets some humility, he's on his deathbed.
Right.
But the beauty of the story, is if Isaac will read these letters and just read them to the end, the beauty of the story is that they have the power to heal him.
Yes. So that brings me to my next question, which is about the letters, the epistolary form. We mentioned a little bit back before that. Tell us about the choice to do that. Why did you choose to tell the story through letters?
I chose to tell the story through letters because I wanted Jacob's heart, if you will, to be on display throughout the entirety of this book. I wanted his heart to be stripped bare. I wanted Jacob's heart to be literally naked before the reader and before his son. And I wanted him for the first time in his life to be unashamed of that emotional nakedness. I didn't want the son's response to his father's letters to be too soon, too abrupt, to be interruptive of his father's purging. Right.
Interesting.
And I will go ahead and tell you, Jay, that the son's response is on the way.
Oh, okay. I was wondering about that. I was
Yeah,
going to say it must be hard. That I kept wondering, what would he say? What would he say? So that's
yeah.
fascinating. What was it like to write? You didn't have the care. I mean, Isaac shows up a little bit. Jacob references him and talks about a few things he does, but he really, he's not a big presence. So
That's right.
Isaac's a little bit of a mystery. We're learning about him in like the relief. Did you do other work on your own while you were writing this book to develop the character of Isaac? I know, sometimes as writers we'll go off and work on character sketches
Right.
outside of the book.
The truth is, Isaac developed in my head even as I was writing this book.
Yeah.
Because, what Isaac would say, what Isaac might think, how Isaac might respond. I had all of that going on in my head.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just put it at bay because, again, I really wanted this father's voice to be
Yes.
so central that he couldn't get away from himself.
Right.
You
Right.
know,
Yep.
and I think that works. But I have to tell you, it's really very, very difficult because
Mm.
to control an entire narrative space with one voice,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
is a hard, hard, hard thing to do.
Yeah.
But I think in this case, it was revelatory. I think in this case, it was powerful. I think in this case, it does a lot of healing work because too many men have never, ever faced themselves emotionally.
Right. Right.
Right? And this is really what I want was the example of what does a man look like
Yeah.
when he looks at himself and tells himself the truth, and when he strips himself bare, and when he must admit to himself, however excellent or however poorly he
Yeah.
has performed in his life. And I wanted that example. I wanted to give that example to the world, and I wanted to do that to really show too that everybody in our nakedness we have some shame.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And you
Both
can
literally in our nakedness and metaphorically in our nakedness, we have some. There is no absolutely perfect body to anybody.
right.
Right. There is no perfect life. There is no perfect self. There's no perfect character. There's no perfect behavior. But what
Right.
I've realized over the years, Jane, is children don't require perfection from parents.
No.
That's our own doing. What
Right.
children want is just honesty.
Right. Right. And there's so much that is hidden from Jacob, right, in his upbringing. He lives with his grandparents, but there's mystery to him about his own mother who's
That's right.
not around, and
That's right.
he doesn't have a model of that kind of openness from the father figure in his life, who is his grandfather Abraham.
That's right.
And you could see how that if you call it, toxic masculinity, whatever you want to call it, is very much generational.
It's very generational. It is unbelievably generational. And for Black men in this country, not only is it generational, but we believe it's divine.
Interesting.
Right?
Tell me
We think
more
that
about that.
actually God created manhood and masculinity this way. In other words, the Bible becomes the kind of epistemological birthplace of this notion of masculinity. This is what God said. According to the Bible, the man's the head of the household. Even this notion that children takes a man's name. All of this, right? Is extremely, extremely critical. But it's also binding, and it's also completely and absolutely imprisoning. And what I really wanted to show is that Jacob is trying to get free.
Yeah.
For himself, because of course his own grandfather was even harder than he was. And Jane, that's really what's I think is so powerful about the story is Isaac thinks his father is hard.
Right.
But his grandfather was 10 times harder.
Oh yeah. Right.
Which means really that Jacob is an improved version.
Right.
Without Isaac having any sense of that whatsoever. And so I think this generational notion of how men evolve, how fathers evolve, how manhood evolves, I think it's so important for children to know, because sometimes if we knew the wounds and the weight that our daddies carried, we would give them some wiggle room.
Right. We would cut them some slack
to grow.
And there's a whole other element of weight, because we're talking about a Black man. And at one point he says, one of the letters opens with him saying, "I was born a slave." I was like, wait, what? And talking about how he meant that in more ways than one. But I'd
right.
love to hear talk about that and the way that like the weight and legacy of slavery plays into these notions of masculinity.
Absolutely, Jack. And forgive me for getting excited. I get excited talking
Well,
about
go for it. I love it.
when Jacob says, I was born a slave, because he was born in the 1940s.
Right.
I think that is powerful. I love that you caught because he's saying, I was born a slave to ideas. I was born a slave to the conceptual reality of what it means to be Black in America. I was born a slave. I think Jacob's also saying he was born a slave in the sense that nobody ever invited me to think. No one ever suggested that I had the right to analyze.
Yeah.
He was never told. He was never asked his opinion about anything. In his world, and it's true, a slave is a person who obeys. A slave is a person who simply follows the rules. A slave is a person who does what he's told.
Right.
And he says, that's the way I was raised. That was the grandfather I had. That's how we kept Black life, alive. By creating people who knew how to follow orders. Right. And then he said, and then I birthed you, and you come along with all this genius. You come along with all this imagination. You come along with all these ideas, and it scared him to death.
Right. Yeah.
Because what do you do with a kid who outthinks you?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And I wanted to bring up also, I don't want to give a spoiler here, but Jacob's marriage is another interesting place where he comes up against, wait a minute, what's going on here? How come? Because his wife is, they're married at the beginning of the 1960s or in the middle of the 60s. She's reading Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique and she's getting liberated. And one of the things, as he and countless other men were seeing, like, well, wait a minute, if women are now equal in all these ways, where does that leave us? Now, what does it mean to be a man?
That's right. And Jacob's whole thing is, where in the world do we get a new idea of manhood from? Who are the men who have the right to reconstruct manhood? Right. And he says it definitely can't be him. He reads the autobiography of Malcolm X, and he is flabbergasted that Malcolm actually changed his own name.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
And who gets to do that? Who has the right to change his own name? And which is the seed of asking the question, who gets the right to construct his own identity?
Yeah. Right.
We as Black people know, what?
And there's that opposite, right, where he's reacting to watching Roots and seeing Kunta Kinte. Is that the name?
That's right.
Have to give up his name, being forced to give up. So it's like the opposite of that. Like, wait a minute, now we can reclaim our names, and we meaning all of us, right, can reclaim our own identity. But that's a foreign concept to him.
That's absolutely right. And in fact, the contrast to this is when he tells his son, "We named you Isaac because Isaac means laughter."
Yeah.
And the irony is, there's nothing funny in this book. That's not true. There are funny parts.
There are some funny moments. Yeah.
There are funny moments. But the overall point here is that Jacob has a hard time finding laughter, finding humor, finding joy, because he's just now beginning to find himself as a man, who's almost 80 years old. He's just now beginning to really come into his own. And yet now he's got to figure out, how can I save my son? How can I heal my son? I've wounded him a lifetime. How can I now heal him even if I'm not here? And I think one of the things that the author does here is to suggest that words have the power to heal, even if the author is not present.
Right. Yeah. And you show that, like you were saying, through the writing of the letters is an act of healing, the reading of the letters. And we'll see when the next book comes out, if it does have a healing effect on Isaac. But certainly by reading, throughout, people are looking to books, and Jacob, as you said, reads autobiography of Malcolm X. He reads The Color Purple, and he starts to he's able to expand his world and his conception of reality.
That's absolutely right. And that's really, in many ways, what this whole book is about. And that is, Jacob gets to the place, again, I won't give a spoiler. Jacob gets to the place where he invites his son to create himself also.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately he's saying every man one day will need to do this. To figure out who you are, and then to discover how your life or your life force has shaped other lives, and to give an account for either having made other lives beautiful, having made other lives joyful and joyous, or to take responsibility for the life forces you subtracted from. And then in your own creative way to figure out how to repair them.
Right. Okay, I want to quickly say, if anyone has questions, please throw them into the chat. I know we got lots of folks watching, so please.
Lots of folks are watching. Hey, everyone.
Yeah, including, yes, some big fans of yours. So please, folks, if you have questions, put them in the chat. One thing I wanted to talk about was the sense of place in the book, right? Jacob grows up in this town of, it's Blackwell, Arkansas, right?
That's right.
And he, on a farm, and he's very much connected to the land, and that's where you're from too, right?
That is, yes.
Okay, so can you talk about the role of the place and that rootedness to the land and how that figures into the story?
Absolutely, and in fact, part of Jacob's problem is that he's displaced in Kansas City. Right? Jacob is very clear that the land, the soil, the smell of the air, the blooming of honeysuckles in spring, this is what he knows. This is what gives him joy. This is what has shaped his identity. When he leaves there and goes to Kansas City, he is absolutely in a foreign place now, right? And it's really only when he goes home that he really has joy and he has contentment. And it's the only time he ever has what might we say, confidence.
Right? He's in his element.
That's right. He's absolutely in his element. Like when he goes home, he knows the difference between collard greens and mustard greens. He knows the difference between a maple tree and an oak tree. He knows the difference between a bass fish and a perch. He knows all these things that a country man would know and take pride in. And so he gets there and his self-worth just multiplies.
Yeah.
And of course he takes his son, and his son loves it too, ironically.
Right.
And Jacob is just in heaven because here he is on the land, the place he grew up, and he has a son that he's brought back to the land. Right. And he's proud because now as a man, he can pass on this lineage and this inheritance, right, through his own bloodline, right? Part of the problem, though, is that he cannot stay because he left the land years ago. He birthed his children somewhere else. This is his home, but it's not Isaac's home, right? Isaac inherits the land, but it's not his home. But this notion of place and this notion of context is so incredibly important because what I think we learn is that place has energy. Yeah. Right? Place absolutely shapes, right, how you think, how you understand yourself, how you see yourself, how you understand your relationship to the world. Place is the foundation of a person's worldview. Right. And Jacob knows nothing really well except this rural southern place. And of course he says, I wish I had raised you on the land. Right. You might have loved me had I raised you on the land. Because what he knows and what he believes is that he would have been a man of a different kind of confidence. He would have been a man who understood God differently. He would have been a man who would not have been so fragile, he thinks. Right.
So he could have been taking his strength from other places instead of drawing it from having to reject his son or, exert his authority in overbearing ways because he really had that foundation literally.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I get the sense that a lot of this is very personal for you, and a lot of, writing this book draws on some of your own experiences, obviously where you're from. Was it difficult at times to write this very personal kind of stuff?
It was difficult, in all honesty. It absolutely was difficult. It wasn't so much difficult for very personal reasons. It was difficult because I have seen the hurt of sons from fathers all over this land. Yeah. And not just sons, daughters also. Sure. I have seen children in general of every race, absolutely in angst, in turmoil because of the distance between themselves and their fathers. And what's funny too, Jane, is I've also talked to those fathers, and I realized those fathers adore their children.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't have most of those fathers have never, ever, ever, ever been invited into a kind of emotional reservoir
Yeah.
themselves, whereby they know they are free to discuss these difficulties with their own children. Most of these fathers believe that in every capacity, every moment of the day, they're supposed to be providing, they're supposed to be leading, they're supposed to be doing something out front of their children. They're supposed to be making ways for their children to do well in the world. But I've told many of these fathers that what they don't know is the children would take a smaller house with you in it, right,
Yeah.
than a large mansion that it takes you 12 hours a day to pay for.
Yeah.
But the problem is the conflict between what we're taught that is the measure of manhood and fatherhood, right, versus what children desire. The gulf is so large.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a misunderstanding.
Yeah, it's just so huge. It's just absolutely so huge. And the biggest thing I've realized is most children want the intimacy. We think they want the materiality. It's just not true. The materiality is signed to us that we feel like our lives are doing the kind of work that they're supposed to be doing for our children, right? But our children don't want so much work. What they really want is presence.
Right. Right. Do you think that's changing? Do you think the ways that fathers show their love or the pressures on them are changing?
I think a bit. I do think a bit. I think younger generations, hey, Mel Chris, I think younger generations are doing a little differently. Yes, I do think that. But I think only slightly. Because there's something magical that happens when a young fellow becomes a father. See, people start asking things of him, right? People start asking him things like, do you have insurance in case your child becomes ill? See, people start preparing this person to know that the physical wherewithal of your child is your job.
Right.
And because that's so, we think, right, a young man gets about the business of trying to figure out what can I do if that means getting 2 jobs.
Yeah.
To make sure all of my child's needs are met. But the truth of the matter is again, most children don't even remember, Jane, how many pairs of shoes they had when they were 5. Most kids don't remember what they got for Christmas when they were 7. Most children don't remember if they had 5 pair of jeans or 17 in the 3rd grade. You know what I'm saying? Like most kids just don't remember it.
Right.
The truth of the matter is it's really not that significant.
Right.
But to a fragile mind that thinks materiality is measuring their worth, give our lives for it.
Yeah. It's amazing how insidious that message is and how it keeps being there. I'm thinking, I found myself thinking sometimes of the parallels for women, right? So women have these other expectations of what it means to be a woman and what those expectations are, and those messages get passed down. And maybe it's more about appearance, or maybe it's more about nurturing and showing affection to the point of stifling yourself, right? This idea of sacrificing who you are in order to give everything for a child. It's a different kind of imprisonment, if you will.
But it is an imprisonment.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And in both cases, it's an imprisonment that the children don't require. Right.
Yeah. Nobody. Yeah. They're not the ones who need it.
No, it's us requiring it on ourselves as adults, right? Because we're thinking that the world is watching and measuring our excellence by what we do, not who we are. Right.
I'm holding this up again because we haven't held it up in a while, so I'm just going to hold it up again. So there we go. So one question I like to ask authors is, as you were writing, did your conception of the book change? Did anything surprise you? Did things go in a direction you might not have expected them to go?
That always happens for me, Jane, because I never know the direction a book is going to go when I start it. I'm one of the writers, like I wish I could, but I can't outline.
Yeah.
I start writing and it just comes like that's the way. And there were so many surprises in this book. And I can't name the surprises because they give, the book away. But to answer the question, yes, there were lots and lots of surprises in this book. There were even one or two places where I just really had to stop and set the book aside for a minute, because I realized that I was really about to present in front of the whole world the dirty laundry of fragile women, right?
Interesting.
But it must be done. It absolutely, positively must be done, because again, there are too many wounded children
Yeah.
who think their fathers as men who didn't want them. And the irony of that is those same men think of themselves as having given up their whole life because of their children. So something's wrong in terms of the communication. And I figured out what it was. And that is, the fathers never tell the children what they're doing or why. Fathers just go to work. I remember that was true for my dad too. He'd come home. My father was an absolute beast in terms of discipline. But my father never said things like, son, I thought about you all day long at work today. Never.
Right. Yeah.
He never said anything like that. Never.
Didn't think you would need it, or thought to do that would be a sign of weakness, and it would break the distance that you need for authority. But you don't need for authority.
You don't need it for authority. That's right. The real authority is in the intimacy. Right. And it's so very, very important. And again, I'm hoping this book will help bridge the gap between fathers and their children. And quite frankly, I'm hoping fathers will now, even if through teary eyes, sit down with their children and actually tell your children what's been in your heart for the last 34 years, for the last 10 years, for the last 50 years, in terms of the things you've hoped, the things you've prayed for, the things you wanted for your children, and the ways in which you spent your life trying to make sure a child got that. Oh, children would be healed in a day.
Right.
One day, a child would be healed from 20 years of pain. I believe that. I absolutely believe that. If the father would just give their heart away.
Maybe we'll have to hope that women are going to be shoving this books into the hands of men too, because women buy so many more books than men, unfortunately. Right. At least when it comes to fiction. True. So we're gonna, ladies, we gotta go put this in men's hands to make sure that they're reading it too, not just women reading. I'm sure there are many men who will read it. Okay, so last call for questions from folks. If you have any questions, please let us know. And yes, for signed copies of Don't Cry for Me, head to Eagle Eye Books in Decatur, Georgia, or on their website you can get signed books shipped. Great place to pick up the book. So my one last sort of kind of fun question is, who is your favorite, besides Jacob, who is your favorite character to write? And tell us a little bit about that character, because you had some very colorful characters in the book.
Yes. I'm trying to think. Oh, wow. Besides Jacob, who's my favorite character? Let me think. Oh, I think probably Mr. Charlie, his friend at work.
Yes, he was great. Every time he was on the page, it lit up. I love hearing about Charlie. Yeah, tell us a little about Charlie.
Because Charlie was a Black man in the 60s who knew Black history.
Yes.
And he knew the importance of a man knowing his history. And he knew the power of reading. He knew the power also of sharing knowledge with others in terms of transformation. And I love that Mr. Charlie was he was unafraid of himself. He was unafraid to be himself. And he was unafraid of what he knew in America. He knew the overarching nature of white supremacy and how it had absolutely limited Black imagination. He knew that. But what he also knew is that his own agency was greater than anybody else's assumed supremacy. Right. Yeah. And so just as a Black man in his own confidence, I just really enjoyed him.
Yeah, he was great. And what I liked is there are a couple scenes of him and Jacob and another couple of friends sort of, going back and forth about this is what it means. No, you have to understand this is, and one was sort of the, let's just not make trouble. And the other was, saying, no, look, we have to take control of our destiny. And that was fascinating seeing that debate play out through the characters.
Absolutely.
Oh, we have a question from Mel Christopher Young. Dr. Daniel Black, have you ever moved to tears while writing? And if so, do you remember a specific moment? Oh, what a great question. Thank you.
Absolutely. In fact, I was moved to tears several times in this book. One specific moment that I'll give that won't give anything away, because we know on page 1 that Jacob has died.
Right.
You know, we get that. Before Jacob dies, towards the end of the book, he asks Isaac to do him a favor. He says, if there is a service, if there is a funeral, if you decide that you want people to gather, right, for what might be a funeral service for me, do one thing. Tell them I tried.
Yeah.
Oh, and I just wept.
Yeah.
Because what more can a person ask?
Right. Right. Yeah.
He said, just tell the world I tried. Right. If you want to tell them I'm a failure, help yourself. Right. No problem. Because in truth, I am a failure. I am that. But I didn't fail because I didn't try.
Right. Right.
I failed in spite of trying.
Yeah.
But if a man tries, that's got to count for something.
Yep.
And so I just thought that was just so
powerful. Yeah. No, super powerful. And the book is evidence of his trying, and
that's right.
And that's what's so powerful about it.
Yeah.
Here's a man trying, pouring his heart and pouring his struggle onto the page. And it's incredibly powerful. It's incredibly intimate too. I kept feeling like, wow, I think that was what made this book so different, is it just the closeness to that wrestling going on and inside his heart and his mind. And so
absolutely.
Very powerful. This is the book, Don't Cry for Me. Dr. Daniel Black, thank you so much for being here. It was wonderful talking to you. Wonderful to be introduced to your work, because I wasn't familiar with it before, but now I have a bunch of other books I want to check out. I want to let folks know, if they like your Facebook page, you do some great spiritual lessons, talking about various topics. Watch one of your videos. It was awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Shout everyone out. So thanks to you, and thanks to everyone who was here. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
And thanks to you, Jane. Thanks to everyone out there. Omike, I see you. Melva, I see you. Yes. LaRonda, I see you. All my church folks, my pastor.
Nice.
Yeah, awesome. Just amazing folks. I have the most amazing community. I really,
you do.
Really do. Oh, they're priceless. They're absolutely, completely priceless. And Jane, thank you as the host for having me. Thank you for taking time to read this book and for helping it get in the hands of those fathers who hopefully will transform as a result of reading this.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for watching. Take care.